I talk to a lot of customers who are going through digital transformation. And obviously people and culture are a big part of the success of those transformations. What do you see as HR's role in all of that?
That's a great question. And specifically when it comes to HR's role in driving change or transformation, especially from a culture perspective, it comes down to the understanding that everything that happens from a culture perspective is ultimately related to something that happened in your people systems or your people mechanisms. And so the HR has a disproportionately important role to make sure that they're inspecting, auditing, strengthening all of those elements of their people systems to make sure that they are cultivating the culture that you really want to have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, when talking with customers, I get a lot of questions. So many of them are curious about how we do things at AWS. That's one of the things I get asked a lot. Is there anything that you think we do well, particularly well from an HR perspective, that other leaders and other businesses could learn from? What are some of those points that you would want to communicate to them?
Yeah. I mean, definitely of all the organizations that I'm aware of, and I've looked and I've had a lot of conversations, I think we are more serious and intentional about our culture than just about any organization that I've come across or am aware of. And I wish more organizations started with culture and thought about the importance of culture. For us, there's a lot of facets to our culture. And I'm happy to talk about that. We certainly talk about this idea of it's always day one. We certainly hold up our first leadership principle, if you will, around customer obsession. And that creates so much energy for us, but it is so incredibly important to us. And then how that relates to some of the things that we do that I also wish other organizations did. Our culture is so intentionally threaded through every facet of the people experience. Who we recruit, who we hire, how we hire, who we choose to recognize and how we recognize them, who we promote, who we give new opportunities to. All of that is threaded by all of the core underpinnings of our culture, and that's what helps us strengthen it over time. And I really wish other organizations were that intentional about it. And I understand it's hard. There's a lot of considerations for organizations. There's a lot of stakeholders. Some of your stakeholders expect, financial results. Some of your stakeholders expect you to make progress on things like market share. Those are all outputs. Those are all the results of the organization system. But the inputs really are your culture and your talent and how those come together to make great capabilities. And if anything, I wish organizations really focused on those inputs that enable them to have the success that many of their stakeholders want them to have.
Yeah, that's powerful. That reminds me kind of another part of our culture, which is thinking long-term, right? An investment in culture is a long-term investment in having those good outputs rather than kind of chasing short-term wins with all those outputs.
I think that's exactly right. And, we spend a lot of time, thinking about culture and where does it come from. And at the end of the day, you can think of culture as the result or the accumulation of every people decision that you've ever made. Who did you hire? Who did you fire? Who did you reward? Who did you praise? Who did you, move to a nice opportunity? Things like that. All of those decisions ultimately are witnessed by colleagues and other people across the organization. And that's where your culture ultimately comes from. So in and of itself is a long-term proposition. And sometimes I talk with leaders or I look at organizations that are trying to change their culture. And they want to change their culture and take a very tactical approach. Like by next Tuesday, we want this to be an attribute of our culture. And it doesn't really happen that way. You do have to take a longer term perspective. One of the things, though, that Andy Jassy talks about, what I really appreciate, he talks about the importance of being strategically patient and tactically impatient. And I think that's a good way to think about changing or evolving your culture in any way. Be strategically patient. Have a vision of what you think it needs to be and how it's going to play out over time, but be tactically impatient. Just don't wait around for it to happen. Take actions, do things that are discrete and tangible for your employees, your managers, and your leaders so they understand what needs to happen in the direction you're trying to go, and just try to keep those two energies in balance.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of kind of be stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details.
Exactly right. That's
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So is there anything kind of following up to that previous question? There's a lot that others can learn that we've done. Are there any mistakes that you could think of that we've made, maybe some missteps that we've had to course correct? I often talk to leaders and say, learn from kind of my experience so you don't have to make these same mistakes.
Yeah.
Anything that you'd like to call out along those lines? And how did we figure out, if so, how did we figure out that it wasn't the right move, and how did we course correct?
No, I'd say we make mistakes all the time. And I think what's very interesting about this environment is we expect to make mistakes because we're trying to do a lot of things and we're trying to be very thoughtful about it and get them right. But we know we can't get everything right. And what's interesting, though, in our environment is there aren't a lot of negative consequences associated with making a mistake. If something doesn't work out, learn from it and try the next thing and kind of get on with it. And that's very foundational to the idea of being a learning organization, that whether you're successful or whether you have some mishaps, you're always getting better. You're always improving. And there's a couple of things that I comment on that are also just very much a part of our culture. And I'll start with how do we make decisions? And one of the things we think about in decision making is the idea of one-way door decisions and two-way door decisions. And just very basically, when you make a one-way door decision, the idea is you make it, you walk through the door, and there's no turning back. And obviously for decisions like that are very high stakes, you want to be extra deliberate, extra thoughtful. You really want to dot those I's and cross those T's. For two-way door decisions, the idea is you make it, if it doesn't work out, you unmake it, and off you go. You want to learn from it, but it isn't necessarily as consequential of a decision. What I find very interesting from a culture perspective and in the lens of making mistakes is, well, what really is a one-way door versus a two-way door decision? And one particular anecdote that I reflect on that many people are aware of, several years ago, Amazon was looking to add another headquarter campus called HQ2. And there was a lot of public excitement about that. And the time came that we announced that we would be opening 2 new HQ2s, one in Arlington, Virginia, and one in New York City. And after the announcement, unfortunately, it wasn't going very well around the announcement of New York. I think there's some things that we probably could have and should have done differently in terms of engaging with some other stakeholders in the community and the like. But when we realized that it wasn't going well, we just made the decision then not to open that HQ. And at the time, I was like, wow, I thought announcing these headquarters was about as one-way door decision as it could get. Like, very public, a lot at stake, a lot of investment. But for us, it turned out to be a two-way door decision. We just stepped back through it. So that idea of making a mistake, we learned a tremendous amount through that experience, but it just didn't work out. There's certainly things that I've done with my team and my organization where we've tried to do one thing or another, and we missed a detail, we just didn't get it right. For some reason, we missed an important insight that would have helped us do a little bit better. But those things happen. We learn from those mistakes and we move on.
So many organizations are still kind of making decisions as if they're all one-way doors. And I think that's why they move so slowly and don't accomplish a lot of things that they want to accomplish.
That's right. And again, I think it's that lens of what really is a one-way door versus a two-way door decision. Because for us in AWS, there are some things that we take so incredibly seriously because they are so incredibly important to our customers. Security is a great example of where we are just so incredibly thoughtful and deliberate. I think we still move with good velocity because that's what our customers expect for AWS. But the way we think about decisions in that arena are just some different than some of the decisions we might make in another arena. But it's that discernment, the ability to differentiate between those that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I also found, and it's particularly true with cloud, from companies that are going from traditional data centers to cloud, that you can take what used to be one-way door decisions and turn them into two-way door decisions, right? And I think infrastructure and cloud is one of the greatest examples of that.
I think that's exactly right. Cloud and the idea of decreasing, the cost of innovation in some respects because you're decreasing the cost of failure. Right. You can try a lot more things in a much more efficient way, and you'll get something right along the way if you do that.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about Amazon culture. Okay. We call ourselves peculiar. What does it mean to be peculiar?
It's funny. I still am not 100% sure what that word means in this context. I think there's many words that very affectionately mean something different at Amazon than I think they do in language. Like you and I were just talking about mistakes. Yeah. I think mistakes in the real world have some negative consequences associated with them, where in Amazon, it's just an opportunity for learning the way we think about it. But I think when we talk about our peculiar culture, it's just acknowledging that we're just a little bit different. And when you give yourself the ability to describe yourself as peculiar, you're giving yourself that permission. And I think there's a lot of elements with our culture that are just that. They are giving ourselves permission. One that I think a lot about, and some people would say is one of the big anchors or pillars of our culture, is the idea of it's always day one. And for me, as I became familiar with it and found myself here, what I internalized around the idea of a day one is that I have permission every single day, no matter what I did yesterday or last week or last year. Today, I have the chance to look at all the data and anecdotes that are in front of me with a fresh set of eyes, and I make the best possible decision I can for our customers. And the best part about day one is it's going to be day one tomorrow. So no matter what I do today, if tomorrow I get a new piece of learning or insight or a new anecdote or a piece of feedback, great. I can make the next possible decision for our customer. And it's always in that energy of being very present. It's not stuck in the past. It's not, worrying about what I did 2 years ago that, somebody still didn't think was a good idea, and somehow I'm caught in a sense of guilt or being overly accountable for something that I did. And also, it's not a future orientation of, I'll get to it tomorrow, or that can wait. And it's like, right now, in the present, it's day one. It's a nice balance between our bias for action, but our ability to learn and our ability to stay present as owners in the culture. So day one mindset is absolutely one of the key pieces. But also, there's no question about it, customer obsession. Sometimes I think to myself that if you and I can start a business and have a very successful business without any customers at all, that actually sounds pretty tempting. Like, imagine what that would look like and what that would feel like, right? Just to make money and have an amazing enterprise without customers. But at Amazon and AWS, just wouldn't be possible. Without customers, there's nothing. Customers and their desire to do new things with technology all the time, that is the fuel. I mean, that is the thing that feeds every idea we've had, every service we build, every expectation we have of ourselves in terms of performance and reliability and durability. All of that is coming from our customer expectations. So it's almost beyond this idea of customer obsession. It's we are so incredibly connected to what our customers need from us that it drives everything we do. So that's obviously a big, big pillar of our culture as well. And then sometimes people are familiar as well. We have our leadership principles, which they're not values, they're not goals, they're not priorities. I like how Andy talks about them. He says they're practices. They're things that we're always constantly doing. We're never going to be perfect in them. We're never going to be accomplished. It's kind of very connected to that idea of day one. No matter how well we're doing on our leadership principles, we have the chance to do even better tomorrow. And we also recognize that there's tension, between our leadership principles. Again, talk about one, which is customer obsession, versus another around bias for action, as an example. You can see how those would work in concert with each other, but there's days as well where they're not working with each other. And that's okay. There's tension in the real world, and so we embrace the idea that there's tension in our leadership principles. And then if I can give you one more that I also think pulls many of these ideas together, we believe very passionately in the idea of working backwards. In many organizations, you have this energy of working forward. I have an idea, or I have a piece of technology, or I have a solution. And my job is to go find a problem for my solution. Go find somebody who wants to use my technology. That's not how we do things. We start with, what is the thing that customers are trying to achieve? Or what is the opportunity? Or what is the problem? And we work backward from that to try to answer that question with a capability we have or a capability that we can acquire as we would pull together. I think that idea of working backward, which we mechanize through many different ways of how we run the company, is key to all of those aspects of our culture, including customer obsession, including day one, really makes it all come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And customers I've worked with, and again, they're always very interested in how we do things, right? I find that the working backwards process is like that aha moment for like really understanding what customer obsession really means, right? We're actually working backwards from the customer, which seems so simple, but it's just so foreign to so many organizations.
It's one of the better innovations I've come across in terms of how do you strengthen a culture, but also how do you activate a lot of people around a few core ideas. It's a wonderful approach.
And also tying it back to something you said before, it's about failing inexpensively. Make the cost of failure as low as possible, which I think is really the key to transformation and innovation for that matter. Working backwards is one of those ways that you can fail inexpensively. Because if you think about it, working forwards, like the traditional way, where you kind of guess and need to be right, you develop this product and you bring it to market, and then it turns out the customers don't really need it. That's a very expensive way to fail.
That's right.
But if you can, write a narrative, get some data, actually talk to customers, see what they need, and then find out from the onset that was a bad idea, well, you just failed very, very inexpensively with that idea, and you can move on to the next one.
I think that's right. And also in the working backward process, if you're not already decided of where you end up, then you can actually be delighted by getting to some unknown destination. And sometimes we experience this with the working backward process, where we work very hard to get crisp on the nature of the problem. And then it's through that mechanism itself that we actually come up with the idea. And it's almost like this process of discovery, which can be quite engaging for not only our teams, but also for our customers, because that gives us a way to come up with the novel solutions that our customers want. Being customer obsessed doesn't mean that we always give the customers exactly what they're asking for. But being customer obsessed means that we come up with the ideas and solutions that resolve their needs, their spoken and unspoken needs. And I think that's an important nuance that we think a lot about.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's inventing on their behalf, right?
Exactly.